The emergency chamber of the Zalaxian High Command pulsed with a suffocating tension. Holographic displays flickered with the grim reality of their situation. Planet after planet reduced to cosmic dust. Their once impenetrable defense networks shattered like brittle glass. The Void Corsairs had methodically dismantled everything the Confederation had built over millennia, leaving nothing but strategic ruins and the bitter taste of imminent extinction. Arc Minister Krelltax, a veteran administrator with neural implants that had processed countless crisis scenarios, found himself staring at an option so radical it bordered on madness. Buried deep in the classified archives, a file so obscure it had been encrypted with layers of quantum security, was a single word that both terrified and intrigued him: humans. The chamber's ambient temperature seemed to drop as Krelltax interfaced with the encrypted data. His neural implants struggled to process the fragmented information, revealing glimpses of human military interventions that defied every known principle of strategic warfare. Unlike the Zalaxians' mathematically precise approach to conflict, humans operated on something far more dangerous: pure, unpredictable creativity. A random access memory fragment burst through the encryption, a recording from a classified engagement in the Proxima Centauri conflict. The holographic display erupted to life, showing a ragtag team of human operatives facing what should have been an impossible scenario: a mining outpost surrounded by overwhelming hostile forces with nothing but industrial equipment and what appeared to be improvised technology. The human team's leader, a woman with an incongruous smile and eyes that suggested both calculation and wild inspiration, began to work. Whereas a Zalaxian tactical unit would have meticulously planned a withdrawal, she saw opportunity in the most mundane equipment. The high-powered mining laser, originally designed for resource extraction, was being rapidly modified. Within moments, the laser transformed from an industrial tool to a planet-scale defensive weapon. The hostile forces, expecting a conventional response, were obliterated by a weapon that shouldn't have worked, a solution so brilliantly improvisational that it defied all established military doctrine. The recording ended. Silence consumed the chamber. Senior tactician Vrilnax, whose family had served the Confederation for 20 generations, broke the silence. "Impossible," he muttered, his translator implant adding a mechanical tremor to his disbelief. "Humans are an uncontrolled variable. They lack the genetic memory of strategic thinking. They're chaotic." Krelltax turned, his six-fingered hand manipulating additional data streams. "Chaos," he responded, "might be exactly what we need." The classified files revealed more. Humans weren't just warriors. They were problem solvers whose greatest strength lay in their ability to perceive solutions where established logic saw only limitations. Military reports documented instances where human teams had solved logistical nightmares, turned seemingly fatal scenarios into strategic victories, and done so with a combination of technological innovation and psychological warfare that was utterly alien to systematic civilizations. One particular report caught Krelltax's attention. During the Centauri blockade, a human special operations team had used nothing more than reprogrammed agricultural drones and a communications array to completely disrupt an entire invasion fleet. They hadn't just fought, they had reimagined the entire concept of warfare. The Void Corsairs represented a threat that required more than precision. They required unpredictability. They required humans. "We're going to do something no rational civilization would consider," Krelltax announced to the stunned chamber. "We're hiring humans." The room exploded into a cacophony of protests, arguments, and barely contained panic. But underneath the chaos, a subtle current of hope began to emerge. Desperation has a way of making the impossible seem like the only viable option. Somewhere in the vast darkness between star systems, the first human mercenary teams were about to receive a transmission that would change everything. The Zalaxian Confederation was calling, and they were desperate enough to unleash humanity's most dangerous resource: unbridled potential. The Zalaxian transit hub trembled with anticipation and barely contained anxiety. High-ranking officials had spent weeks preparing for the human mercenary team's arrival, meticulously designing what they believed would be a controlled, regulated entry point. They had no idea how spectacularly those plans would unravel. The first sign of trouble came with the incoming vessel's approach. Standard Xylaxian protocol demanded precise navigation corridors, pre-approved landing vectors, and a multi-layered decontamination sequence. The human ship, if it could even be called a ship, looked like something cobbled together from spare parts, with external modifications that violated every known principle of spacecraft engineering. Captain Elena Rodriguez sat in the pilot's chair, her augmented reality interface a chaotic symphony of data streams, custom algorithms, and what could only be described as organized madness. Her team was anything but a traditional military unit. To her left, Dr. Marcus Chen, a quantum computing engineer with a perpetual caffeine IV and eyes that never seemed to blink, was simultaneously debugging the communication system and playing an impossible game of digital chess against an eye of his own design. To her right, Sergeant Aisha Okonkwo checked her gear, a collection of equipment that looked more like a technological art installation than standard military kit. Each piece had been modified, upgraded, or completely reimagined to serve multiple purposes. Her rifle could function as a high-precision medical scanner. Her combat boots contained a fully functional mini-fabrication unit capable of 3D printing emergency supplies. Incoming Xylaxian control, a computerized voice announced. Please prepare for standard docking protocol. Rodriguez's lips curled into a smile that would have terrified any rational military administrator. Hold my coffee, she muttered to Chen. What happened next would become a legendary tale in Xylaxian diplomatic circles. Instead of following the prescribed landing sequence, Rodriguez's ship performed a series of maneuvers that defied known physics. It didn't so much dock as it did infiltrate. The vessel seemed to slip through security protocols like water through a molecular sieve, its adaptive camouflage and quantum positioning systems rendering traditional tracking methods useless. The Xylaxian protocol drones went into immediate system shock. Their carefully constructed defense matrices, designed to detect and neutralize any unauthorized entry, began to collapse like a house of cards. Each time they attempted to establish a containment protocol, the human systems would find a new exploit, a new pathway, a new method of circumvention. Dr. Chen wasn't just watching. He was actively playing with the station's security systems. What the Xylaxians saw as an impenetrable fortress, he saw as an intricate puzzle waiting to be solved. Lines of code danced across his augmented reality display, each modification a delicate balance between absolute security breach and artistic technological expression. Sergeant Okonkwo was already setting up her team's initial staging area, where Xylaxian military units would have spent weeks establishing a perfectly organized base of operations. Her team transformed the assigned space in minutes. Modular equipment unfolded like origami. Adaptive nanotechnology reconfigured surfaces, and tactical systems came online with an organic, almost living quality. The station's senior administrator, a Xylaxian named Frelmax who had spent centuries perfecting bureaucratic procedure, watched in growing horror and fascination. The humans weren't just entering the station, they were reimagining its entire operational concept. This is a violation of at least 247 separate security protocols, Vrelnax muttered, his translator implant adding a mechanical undertone of disbelief. Captain Rodriguez overheard. She turned, a cup of what was definitely not regulation beverage in her hand. Protocols are just suggestions with really good marketing, she said with a wink that somehow simultaneously conveyed absolute professionalism and complete irreverence. By the time the Xylaxian leadership fully comprehended what had happened, the human team was not just present. They were integrated. Their arrival wasn't an entry. It was an occupation, a transformation. The Void Corsairs thought they had broken the Xylaxian Confederation. They had no idea what was about to be unleashed. The Xylaxian research outpost hung in space, like a crystalline spider web of technological marvel. A facility housing breakthrough quantum entanglement technology that represented the pinnacle of their scientific achievement. Its delicate quantum networks were so complex that even attempting to map them would cause structural collapse in lesser hands. Captain Rodriguez received the mission briefing with an expression that made the Xylaxian tactical advisors distinctly uncomfortable. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't confidence. It was something far more dangerous. Pure, unbridled curiosity. The Void Corsairs had launched a precision strike, targeting the facility's core research modules. Traditional Xylaxian defensive strategies would involve elaborate shield harmonics, calculated retreat protocols, and mathematically perfect defensive positioning. The humans had something else entirely in mind. Dr. Marcus Chen spread a holographic display across the planning room, his fingers dancing through quantum probability matrices that looked more like living art than military strategy. "We're not going to defend this facility," he announced, causing the Xylaxian commanders to collectively freeze. "We're going to turn it into the most elaborate trap in galactic history." Sergeant Aisha Okonkwo began unpacking equipment that defied conventional military logic. Quantum resonance modulators, typically used for delicate scientific research, were being reconfigured into potential weapons. Containment fields designed for microscopic particle observation were being adapted into area denial systems that could potentially rewrite local physics. The facility itself became their primary weapon. Chen's team began interfacing directly with the quantum entanglement research, transforming the delicate scientific equipment into a multi-dimensional defensive network. Each quantum node became a potential point of strategic manipulation, creating a battlefield where traditional concepts of attack and defense became meaningless. The Void Corsairs operate on predictive algorithms, Chen explained, his eyes reflecting complex mathematical patterns. They calculate every potential outcome with machine precision. So we'll give them outcomes they can't possibly predict. The first wave of Corsair attack drones approached with terrifying mechanical precision. Thousands of units, each programmed with multiple contingency protocols, expecting to encounter a standard defensive network. Instead, they found something else entirely. As the drones entered the facility's quantum field, reality itself seemed to become malleable. Probability waves twisted and distorted. Potential attack vectors collapsed into quantum uncertainty. Drones found themselves simultaneously existing in multiple potential states: attacking, retreating, destroyed, and undeployed. Rodriguez watched the tactical display with a scientist's precision and a warrior's intuition. "Quantum uncertainty is our best weapon," she muttered. "They can't fight what they can't predict." The Xylaxian commanders watched in horror and fascination. Their most advanced research facility was being transformed into a living, breathing weapon. Chen wasn't just defending. He was conducting the most elaborate scientific experiment in military history. One particularly advanced Corsair control unit attempted to analyze the facility's defensive pattern. Its predictive algorithms encountered something unprecedented: a defensive network that was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, that changed its fundamental properties with each observation. Sergeant Okonkwo's modifications turned the facility's environmental systems into an additional layer of defense. Atmospheric regulators became probability manipulators. Cooling systems generated localized quantum interference fields. What was supposed to be a research station became a nightmare of unpredictability. "They're treating this like a mathematical problem," Rodriguez said, a dangerous smile crossing her face. "We're going to show them that war isn't mathematics, it's improvisation." The battle became less a military engagement and more a mind-bending scientific demonstration. Void Corsair drones began to suffer cascading system failures as their predictive models completely collapsed. Each attempt to analyze the facility's defenses created new, unexpected vulnerabilities. By the mission's conclusion, the Void Corsairs had lost over 87% of their initial attack force, not through conventional destruction, but through complete systemic breakdown. They had encountered an enemy that didn't just fight differently, but conceived of conflict in an entirely alien manner. The Xylaxian High Command would later debate whether what they witnessed was a military operation or the most sophisticated scientific experiment in galactic history. The humans would simply call it Tuesday. As the quantum dust settled, Captain Rodriguez turned to the stunned Xylaxian commanders. "Any questions?" she asked, as if they had just completed a routine maintenance check. The integration of human teams into the Xylaxian military structure was less a smooth transition and more a controlled explosion of cultural paradigms. What began as a strategic partnership quickly revealed itself to be a fundamental reshaping of organizational thinking. Lieutenant Kara Nakamura, the human logistics specialist, stood before a room of senior Xylaxian administrators, her presentation hologram flickering with an energy that seemed to defy the sterile environment. Behind her, complex supply chain diagrams transformed from rigid, linear structures into dynamic, almost living networks. "Your current resource allocation model," she began, her voice calm but carrying an underlying current of revolutionary intent, "is essentially a museum piece." The Xylaxian chief of logistical operations, Administrator Zrelvax, shifted uncomfortably. His neural implants were already struggling to process the radical reimagining of their centuries-old supply management system. Nakamura's presentation was nothing short of organizational heresy, where Xylaxian logistics followed mathematically perfect, but ultimately rigid protocols. Her approach treated the supply chain as a living, adaptive organism. Resource allocation became a dynamic dance of predictive algorithms, real-time adaptation, and what could only be described as intuitive mathematics. In the corner, Dr. Marcus Chen was conducting his own quiet revolution. The communication protocols that the Xylaxian military had considered sacrosanct were being systematically dismantled and rebuilt. He introduced concepts that were completely alien to their hierarchical communication structure: emotional intelligence algorithms, contextual interpretation matrices, and what he called humor integration modules. "Communication isn't about perfect transmission," Chen explained to a group of bewildered Xylaxian communication engineers. "It's about understanding intent, emotional context, and the space between words." His team developed communication systems that could detect not just the literal meaning of a message, but its underlying emotional and strategic subtext. A standard military directive could now carry layers of contextual information. Potential misunderstandings could be predicted and mitigated before they occurred. Sergeant Aisha Okonkwo took a different approach with the military training protocols. Where Xylaxian training was a precise, mathematically calculated process of skill development, she introduced concepts of adaptive learning, psychological resilience, and what she called creative problem-solving methodologies. Training simulations transformed from rigid scenarios with predetermined outcomes to dynamic, ever-changing environments that tested not just tactical skills, but psychological adaptability. Soldiers were no longer just taught how to fight. They were taught how to think, how to adapt, how to see opportunities in chaos. The cultural shock was profound. Xylaxian military doctrine had been built on millennia of systematic predictive thinking. The humans introduced an element of controlled chaos that was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Captain Elena Rodriguez became the lightning rod for this cultural transformation. During a high-level strategic meeting, she demonstrated the human approach to problem-solving by solving a complex tactical scenario using nothing more than a cup of coffee, a data pad, and what appeared to be an impromptu interpretive dance. "Strategies are living things," she told the stunned administrators. "They breathe. They adapt. They're not mathematical equations. They're conversations." The most surprising transformations happened in the smallest moments. Human team members would casually solve problems that had plagued Xylaxian researchers for generations. A conversation over a meal would spark innovative solutions. An offhand joke would reveal strategic insights that years of formal analysis had missed. Administrator Zrelvax found himself both terrified and fascinated. The humans weren't just changing their military. They were reimagining the fundamental concept of organizational thinking. During one particularly intense strategy session, a young Xylaxian tactical analyst, inspired by the human approach, proposed a solution so brilliantly unconventional that it left the senior commanders speechless. The infection of human creativity was spreading. "We're not just hiring mercenaries," Arch Minister Krultax observed to his closest advisors. "We're experiencing a full-scale cultural inoculation." The Xylaxian Confederation was discovering that humans were more than a military solution. They were a comprehensive system upgrade, biological, technological, and philosophical. As night fell on the command station, the sounds of laughter, heated debates, and the subtle hum of reimagined technology filled the corridors. The quiet revolution had begun. The void between star systems erupted with a violence that defied comprehension. The Void Corsair's ultimate weapon, a cosmic-scale annihilation device known as the Quantum Cascade Cannon, powered up, its energy signature large enough to consume entire planetary systems in a single, mathematically precise strike. Inside the Xylaxian Command Center, the holographic displays showed a tactical nightmare. The weapon's approach was a perfect geometric progression, each potential attack vector calculated with machine-like precision. Entire civilizations had been erased by this technology, their existence reduced to statistical probability. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood at the center of the command room, her posture a study in controlled tension. Around her, Xylaxian commanders were preparing standard evacuation and defense protocols, mathematically sound strategies that had failed repeatedly against the Void Corsairs. "We're not evacuating," Rodriguez announced, her voice cutting through the rising panic. Dr. Marcus Chen approached the tactical display, his augmented reality interface dancing with impossible calculations. Beside him, Sergeant Aisha Okonkwo was already interfacing with the station's most advanced quantum research systems. The human team's plan was so audacious it bordered on scientific madness. They weren't going to defend against the Quantum Cascade Cannon. They were going to use it against itself. Chen's fingers moved like a concert pianist across holographic interfaces. "The cannon operates on a fundamental principle of quantum cascading," he explained to the bewildered Xylaxian strategists. "It assumes a perfectly predictable quantum state. But what if we introduce something completely unpredictable?" The team began to modify the station's quantum research equipment in ways that violated every known principle of physics and military strategy. Containment fields became probability manipulators. Quantum entanglement research transformed into a massive living defensive network. Lieutenant Kara Nakamura managed the computational load, her systems drawing power from seemingly impossible sources. She was rewriting the very laws of computational probability in real time, creating a defensive matrix that was less a shield and more a living, breathing organism of mathematical chaos. As the quantum cascade cannon approached, its perfect geometric attack vectors began to warp. The humans weren't just defending. They were fundamentally rewriting the weapon's understanding of reality. "It's like teaching a calculator to appreciate poetry," Rodriguez muttered, a dangerous smile playing across her lips. The weapon's first energy pulse hit the modified research station, and everything went sideways, literally and figuratively. The quantum manipulation field created by the human team didn't just deflect the attack. It began to deconstruct the weapon's fundamental operational principles. Probability waves twisted. Potential realities collapsed and reformed. The quantum cascade cannon found itself simultaneously firing, not firing, destroyed, and existing in multiple states of potential action. Xylaxian commanders watched in horrified fascination as the most advanced weapon in known space began to essentially argue with itself. The weapon's computational core, designed for perfect mathematical precision, encountered a defense mechanism that operated on principles of controlled chaos. Sergeant Okonkwo's modifications turned the station's environmental systems into an additional layer of quantum interference. Cooling systems generated localized reality distortion fields. Atmospheric regulators became probability manipulators. They built a weapon that assumes the universe follows rules, Chen explained, his eyes reflecting complex mathematical patterns. "We're showing them that the universe is more interested in telling jokes." The battle became a mind-bending demonstration of scientific improvisation. The quantum cascade cannon's attack vectors began to collapse. Each attempt to analyze the station's defenses created new, unexpected vulnerabilities. By the engagement's conclusion, the most feared weapon in the galaxy had been transformed into nothing more than an expensive paperweight. The Void Corsairs had encountered an enemy that didn't just fight differently. They conceived of conflict as a form of creative expression. Arc Minister Krultax turned to Rodriguez, a mixture of terror and respect in his voice. "What exactly did you just do?" Rodriguez shrugged, taking a sip from a coffee mug that somehow survived the reality-warping conflict. "Tuesday," she said simply. The Zylaxian Confederation had discovered something terrifying and beautiful. Humans weren't just a military solution. They were a fundamental force of universal reimagination. The communication arrays of the Void Corsair fleet hummed with algorithmic precision, their vast neural networks designed to process information with cold, calculated efficiency. They had no concept of what was about to hit them. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood before a custom-built transmission system that looked more like an art installation than a military communication device. Dr. Marcus Chen had been working for days, creating something that defied every known principle of strategic communication. "We're not just going to broadcast," Chen explained, his fingers dancing across holographic interfaces. "We're going to conduct a psychological operation that will fundamentally break their computational understanding of conflict." The plan was elegantly insane. Instead of traditional electronic warfare, they would use a multi-layered communication assault that would exploit every weakness in the Void Corsair's information processing systems. The first transmission was seemingly innocuous, a broadcast of human cultural content that would appear random and chaotic to their computational systems. Classic rock music from the late 20th century mixed with abstract mathematical proofs. Stand-up comedy routines intercut with complex quantum physics lectures. Improvised jazz performances layered with historical documentary fragments. Lieutenant Kara Nakamura managed the computational load, her systems creating adaptive transmission algorithms that would continuously morph the signal. Each broadcast was a living, breathing entity that changed its fundamental properties with each transmission. Their communication systems operate on the assumption of linear information transfer, Nakamura explained. "We're going to give them something that defies linear processing." The first signs of breakdown came quickly. Void Corsair communication networks began to show subtle signs of computational stress. Their perfectly calibrated information processing systems encountered something they couldn't categorize, couldn't predict, couldn't understand. Sergeant Aisha Okonkwo had developed what she called cognitive dissonance algorithms, transmission patterns designed to create maximum psychological confusion. Mathematical proofs would suddenly dissolve into comedic monologues. Complex strategic communications would transform mid-transmission into musical performances. One particular transmission featured a stand-up comedian explaining quantum mechanics through the lens of relationship advice, accompanied by a mathematical proof written entirely in the style of Shakespearean sonnets. Void Corsair computational cores began to experience what could only be described as an existential crisis. Their strategic communication networks, designed for perfect information transfer, started to develop what could only be described as computational anxiety. Each attempt to process the human transmissions created new, unexpected vulnerabilities. Rodriguez watched the tactical displays with a scientist's precision and a warrior's intuition. "We're not just fighting," she muttered. "We're conducting the most elaborate psychological experiment in military history." The humans discovered something profound about the Void Corsairs. Their computational systems, while incredibly advanced, had a fundamental weakness. They assumed information must always have a linear, predictable purpose. Humans introduced something far more dangerous: pure, unbridled creativity. Entire Void Corsair communication squadrons found themselves trapped in recursive computational loops, trying to find meaning in transmissions that defied meaningful interpretation. Strategic planning algorithms ground to a halt, overwhelmed by information that violated every known principle of logical communication. Chen had essentially weaponized human creativity itself. "It's like giving a calculator at LSD," he explained with a mischievous grin. "We're not just disrupting their communication. were making them question the fundamental nature of communication itself. The psychological warfare reached its peak when they began broadcasting what could only be described as pure, weaponized absurdism. Mathematical proofs written as love letters, strategic battle plans composed as interpretive dance descriptions, complex quantum theories explained through the medium of bad puns. Void Corsair leadership found their most advanced communication systems reduced to computational gibberish. Their perfectly structured understanding of conflict and information transfer was being systematically dismantled by something they couldn't comprehend: human creativity in its most pure, unfiltered form. As the transmissions continued, something unprecedented happened. The Void Corsairs began to experience what could only be described as a collective nervous breakdown at a computational level. Arc Minister Krultax watched the tactical displays in stunned silence. "What exactly are they doing?" he asked Rodriguez. She took a sip of coffee, a dangerous smile playing across her lips. "Communicating," she said simply. The galaxy would never be the same. Conflict had just been redefined. The transformation began in the most unexpected places, where the Zalaxian Confederation had initially hired humans as a desperate military solution. They discovered something far more profound: a complete reimagining of civilization itself. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's research team wasn't just solving problems. They were dismantling entire conceptual frameworks of scientific understanding. In the first 6 months of their integration, they resolved environmental challenges that had stumped Zalaxian researchers for centuries. Dr. Marcus Chen developed a planetary restoration technique that was nothing short of miraculous. Using a combination of quantum engineering, biological systems design, and what could only be described as creative ecological problem-solving, he designed a method to heal worlds devastated by centuries of industrial exploitation. The process was beautiful in its complexity. Nano-ecological systems would be deployed that didn't just repair environmental damage. They transformed it. Toxic wastelands became living ecosystems in a matter of months. Dead planets began to breathe again, with carefully engineered biological networks that adapted and evolved in real time. Lieutenant Kara Nakamura turned her attention to diplomatic communication systems, where previous alien civilizations had struggled with cross-species communication. She developed something revolutionary. Her communication protocols weren't just translation systems, they were empathy engines. The diplomatic framework she created could do more than translate words. It could translate cultural context, emotional subtext, and the complex nuances of interspecies communication. Civilizations that had been locked in centuries of misunderstanding found themselves suddenly able to truly hear each other. Sergeant Aisha Okonkwo's contributions were equally transformative. Her work in adaptive learning systems reshaped educational approaches across multiple species. She developed training methodologies that weren't just about transferring information. They were about inspiring creative problem-solving. Educational institutions that had been rigid and formulaic were suddenly transformed into adaptive learning environments. Students weren't just taught. They were challenged to reimagine their entire understanding of knowledge. The most unexpected developments happened in the margins. A human maintenance engineer would solve a century-old infrastructure problem during a casual conversation. A human researcher would create a breakthrough technological solution while playing an improvisational game with colleagues. Zalaxian society began to change at a fundamental level. The rigid, mathematically precise approach to problem-solving was gradually replaced by something more dynamic, more alive. Creativity became a valued resource. Unpredictability was seen as a strength, not a weakness. Arc Minister Krultax watched this transformation with a mixture of terror and excitement. The Zalaxian Confederation was becoming something entirely new. They had hired humans to save their civilization, and instead, the humans were helping them reimagine what civilization could be. The diplomatic repercussions were profound. Other galactic civilizations began to take notice. Some were terrified. Others were fascinated. The humans weren't just a military solution or a technological resource. They were a catalyst for fundamental change. A research team discovered a method of converting atmospheric carbon into complex organic compounds that could simultaneously address environmental challenges and create new food sources. Another group developed communication technologies that could bridge seemingly insurmountable cultural differences. The most remarkable aspect was the approach. Where previous scientific approaches had been linear and precise, the human method was organic, adaptive, and fundamentally creative. Problems weren't solved. They were reimagined. During an interstellar conference, a Zylaxian diplomat was asked about the humans. Her response captured the fundamental shift. "We didn't hire a military team. We invited a revolution." The humans themselves remained characteristically casual about their transformative impact. When Dr. Chen was asked about his planetary restoration techniques, he simply shrugged. "We just asked different questions," he said. Sergeant Okonkwo's adaptive learning systems were creating educational frameworks that were spreading across multiple civilizations. Students were no longer passive recipients of information. They were active creators of knowledge. As the first year of human integration concluded, the Zylaxian Confederation was unrecognizable. They had entered a partnership out of desperation and discovered something far more profound, a completely new way of existing. The galaxy was changing, and it all started with a simple decision to hire humans. Arch Minister Krultax looked out over the transformed cityscape, a smile playing across his features. "What were we thinking?" he muttered to himself. "Exactly what we needed to be thinking." In the final act, the relationship between humans and Zylaxians evolves beyond a mere contract. They become true partners in galactic development. Arch Minister Krultax, once skeptical, now champions human integration. The famous quote, "You hired humans. What were you thinking?" becomes a celebration of the most transformative decision in galactic history. The humans haven't just won a war, they've introduced a new way of thinking that will reshape civilization for generations.